It was Christmas Eve, and my house smelled like pine, and something wrong. I'd put up the tree myself that year, the same 7-foot Douglas fir I bought every December from the same lot on Millbrook Road, the one run by a retired schoolteacher named Harold, who always threw in a free wreath if you paid cash. My wife, Carol, had started that tradition 31 years ago. She passed 3 winters back, and I kept it going because some things you just keep going. Not out of grief, out of respect. My son Derek and his wife Sabrina were due at 6. I'd made Carol's pot roast, the one with the carrots and the Worcestershire sauce, and the 2 hours of patience it demanded. I'd set the table with the good dishes. I was 68 years old, and I still knew how to set a proper table. They arrived at 6:15. Derek hugged me, the way men hug when they want something. Firm on the back, brief, eyes already moving past your shoulder to scan the room. Sabrina kissed my cheek and said the house smelled wonderful. She always said that. I used to think it was warmth. I'd since revised my opinion. We ate. Derek talked about his investment portfolio. Sabrina talked about a renovation they were planning. New kitchen. Open concept. The whole thing. I asked questions. I listened. I am very good at listening. After dinner, Derek pushed back from the table and said he had something he wanted to go over with me. He said it the way people say it when they've rehearsed it in the car on the way over. Casual, like it had just occurred to him. He pulled a folder from the bag he'd left by the door. I noticed the bag when they came. In a leather portfolio. The kind you bring to a business meeting. Not a Christmas dinner. I noticed, but said nothing. "Dad," he said, setting the folder on the table next to Carol's good dishes. "Sabrina and I have been talking, and we want to make sure your future is protected." I poured myself a little more coffee. "That's thoughtful," I said. He opened the folder. There were several documents inside, clipped neatly together. He'd used a yellow highlighter on the signature lines. He was thorough. My son. I'll give him that. The documents were for something called the Hartwell Family Trust. The name sounded warm, responsible, the kind of name a financial planner invents to make a trap feel like a gift. The trust would consolidate my assets, the house, the investment accounts, my share of the property in Blount County, under a single structure. For tax efficiency, Derek explained. For estate planning purposes. To avoid probate, he said. And he said probate the way people say it, when they want the word itself to do the frightening. Sabrina nodded at everything he said like she was in a courtroom and he was giving the closing argument. "I'd want my own attorney to look at this first," I said. Derek smiled. "Of course. But Dad, we've already had it reviewed. It's standard language. Margaret Chen at Holloway and Briggs drafted it herself." I didn't know any Margaret Chen at Holloway and Briggs. I didn't know any Holloway and Briggs. What I did know was that no document a son brings to a Christmas dinner in a pre-packed leather portfolio, with the signature lines pre-highlighted in yellow, is ever standard language. "I appreciate it," I said. "Let me take a few days." Something moved behind Derek's eyes, just for a moment. Then the smile came back. "Sure, Dad. No rush." But there was rush. I could feel it the way you feel a change in pressure before a storm. I want to go back. I want to tell you how I got to that Christmas dinner knowing what I knew, because the story doesn't start in December. It starts the previous April, in a hospital room, with a misdiagnosis that turned out to be nothing. A shadow on a scan, that a second opinion from a better radiologist, resolved in under a week. But in that first week, before the second opinion, I was 67 years old, sitting in a paper gown, being told to prepare for a difficult conversation. Derek had been wonderful that week. He was there every day. He brought me coffee from the good place on 5th, not the hospital cafeteria. He held my hand. He cried, or he did something with his face that looked like crying. He asked gentle questions about my affairs. Where did I keep important documents? Did I have a will? Had I thought about what I wanted? In terms of care? If things progressed? I answered carefully. I told him what he needed to hear, to feel reassured. What I did not tell him was that 3 days into that hospital week, I had called my attorney, a woman named Patricia Walsh, who had handled my business affairs for 11 years, and who I trusted with a completeness I reserve for very few people. I told Patricia what was happening medically, and I told her what I was beginning to notice about my son's questions. Patricia is not an emotional woman. She is precise and she is quiet, and when she says something, she means it exactly. She said, "Raymond, let's make sure everything is arranged the way you want it arranged, not the way anyone else wants it arranged. You, Raymond." We spent the next 2 months doing exactly that. The house on Clearwater Drive, the house I'd bought with Carol in 1989, where Derek grew up, where his sister Julia came home from college for holidays, went into a trust that Patricia structured. Not the Hartwell family trust, my trust. The beneficiaries were Julia's children, my 2 grandchildren who were 12 and 9, and who still called me on my birthday without being reminded. The trustee, the person with actual control, was Patricia's firm. My investment accounts, 31 years of careful work, were restructured with updated beneficiary designations. Derek's name did not appear on any of them. I did not tell Derek any of this. I did not tell him because by the time the second opinion came back clean and I walked out of that hospital with nothing wrong with me, I had started paying attention in a different way. I started paying attention the way you pay attention when you realize that someone you love has been measuring you for something other than affection. There was the phone call I wasn't supposed to hear in July. I had come home early from a drive, and Derek was in the backyard. He'd stopped by while I was out and let himself in with the spare key I kept under the flagstone. He didn't know I'd pulled into the garage. I came through the kitchen door and heard his voice through the screen. He was talking to someone about timelines, about what the property in Blount County was worth in the current market, about whether I'd mentioned updating the will recently. I stood in my kitchen with my car keys still in my hand, and I listened to my son discuss my assets the way a contractor discusses a job estimate. I went back out through the garage. I drove to the end of the block. I sat in my car for a while. I am not a man who falls apart. Carol used to say, I process things inward and sideways instead of forward, which was her gentle way of saying, I go quiet when I'm hurt. She was right. I went very quiet that July afternoon, and I stayed quiet for a long time. And while I was quiet, I was also thinking very clearly. I called Patricia the next morning. Over the following months, I made changes I did not announce. I moved the spare key. I opened a separate checking account at a different bank, a small one, just enough for day-to-day expenses so that my primary accounts would never be casually visible. I asked Patricia to send all correspondence to a post office box I rented in the next town over. I also started keeping notes. Dates, times, things said. Not because I intended to go to the police. Because a man who documents things has something. A man who only remembers things does not have. He has a record. By December, I knew what was coming. Not the exact shape of it, but the direction. So when Derek set that folder on my good Christmas tablecloth, I was not surprised. I was, if anything, curious about how he'd constructed it. I took the documents upstairs that night. After they left, I read every page. It was sophisticated work. Margaret Chen, whoever she was, knew what she was doing. The trust language would have transferred functional control of all listed assets to Derek within 90 days of my signature. My name would remain on paper. Derek's decisions would be the ones that mattered. It was the kind of document designed to look like protection and function like a cage. I called Patricia on the 26th and read her the relevant sections over the phone. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "They hired someone good." "Not good enough," I said. "No," she said, "not good enough." I did not sign the documents. I told Derek, when he called on the 28th to follow up, that I was still reviewing them. He said he understood. He said there was no pressure. His voice was the voice of a man who had decided on a different approach. The different approach came in January. Sabrina called on a Thursday morning, which was unusual. She almost never called me directly. She said Derek had been having a terrible time at work, that there were financial pressures I wasn't aware of, that she hoped I understood how much they both cared about me, and how everything they were proposing was genuinely for my benefit. I said I appreciated her honesty. She said there was another option they'd been thinking about. A smaller step. Just to start. A limited power of attorney. Covering only financial decisions in the event I was incapacitated. Standard, she said. Everyone has one. I told her I already had one. There was a pause. Oh, she said. Who did you name? My attorney, I said. Patricia Walsh. She's been handling my affairs for over a decade. Another pause. Longer. That's unusual, Sabrina said. Most people name a family member. I know, I said. I gave it careful thought. She said she'd let Derek know. She sounded like someone whose calculator had just returned an unexpected number. Derek called that evening. He was less careful than Sabrina. He said he was hurt that I didn't trust him enough to include him in decisions about my own care. He said Carol would have wanted the family to look after things together. He said the word family 4 times in 3 minutes, which is the word people reach for when they want to borrow legitimacy from something they haven't earned. I let him talk. When he was done, I said, Derek, I love you. I want that to be true for a long time. But my financial arrangements are mine. And they're handled. And they're not going to change. He said he needed time to process that. I said I understood. What came next, I was less prepared for. Not because I didn't see it coming, I did, approximately, but because even when you see something coming, the arrival of it still lands. On a Saturday morning in February, I got a call from my neighbor Gwen, who is 73 and sharp and has lived next door to me for 18 years. She said a man had come to my door the previous afternoon while I was out. Young, well-dressed. He'd spent about 10 minutes on the porch, she said, and at one point, she saw him try the door handle. I asked her to describe him. She described Derek. I drove home from the hardware store where I'd been when she called. I checked the locks unchanged, because Derek no longer had a key. I checked the garage undisturbed. I walked through every room. In my office, on my desk, a single sheet of paper had been slid under the door. It was a letter, typed and printed. No letterhead. It said that a member of the family had concerns about my capacity to manage my own affairs and had initiated a request for a welfare check through the County Adult Protective Services Office. It said that an evaluator might be in touch. It said this was being done out of love. It was not signed. I sat down at my desk and read the letter twice. I was very calm. I want you to understand that I was completely calm, because there is a kind of clarity that comes when you realize someone has stopped pretending. I called Patricia. I read her the letter over the phone. She said, "Okay, this changes the timeline slightly. Can you come in Monday?" I was there at 9 o'clock Monday morning. Patricia had already done preliminary research over the weekend. What Derek and Sabrina appear to have been attempting. And she was careful about the word appear, because she is always careful, was a legal process, sometimes used in genuine eldercare situations, but increasingly weaponized in exactly this way. If they could establish, through a sympathetic evaluator, that I showed signs of cognitive decline, they could petition for guardianship. Guardianship would supersede my own existing arrangements. It was a longer route than the trust documents, but a more powerful one. Their problem, was that I had documentation. Patricia had 11 months of records. My restructured accounts, the trust, the updated beneficiary designations, all predating any concern they'd raised about my capacity. I had the notes I'd kept since July. I had Gwen's account of Derek trying my door. I had the unsigned letter. I also had, as it turned out, something Derek did not know about. In October, at Patricia's suggestion, I had undergone a full neuropsychological evaluation. Not because anyone required it, because Patricia said, "If anyone ever questions your capacity, I want a document dated before they started asking." The results were what anyone who knew me would have expected. Strong executive function. Normal memory. No indicators of any kind of cognitive impairment. The evaluator, a doctor, Anand Mehta, at the university hospital, had been puzzled by my reason for requesting the evaluation. I told him my attorney had advised it as part of estate planning. He said that was unusually proactive. I said I'd always believed in preparation. Patricia filed a cease and desist with Derek's attorney, the elusive Margaret Chen, in the second week of February. The letter was detailed and unambiguous. It outlined the documentation we held, referenced the neuropsychological evaluation, and noted that any further attempts to interfere with my legal or financial autonomy would be met with civil action. Margaret Chen did not respond to Patricia directly. Derek called me instead. He called on a Tuesday evening. I was in the kitchen making soup, the kind you make with a leftover rotisserie chicken and whatever vegetables need using up. I let it go to voicemail. He called again. I let that go too. On the third call, I picked up. He said, "Dad, I think there's been a misunderstanding." I stirred my soup. "What kind of misunderstanding?" I asked. He said the welfare check request had been a mistake. He said Sabrina had filed it without fully consulting him, and that he'd told her it was the wrong approach. He said he was embarrassed. He said the letter, the unsigned one, he said he wanted to explain that. I waited. He said he had been worried about me. He said the worry had made him act in ways he wasn't proud of. He said he loved me. There was a version of me, not so long ago, that would have felt something shift in my chest at that. A softening. A willingness to step toward what sounded like remorse. Carol always said I was too quick to offer people the benefit of the doubt. She wasn't criticizing. She thought it was one of the better things about me. She just wanted me to protect myself, too. I thought about Carol while Derek talked. "Derek," I said, when there was a pause, "I'd like you to answer me one question honestly." He said, "Of course. The Hartwell Family Trust documents," I said. "If I had signed them at Christmas dinner, and then the welfare check had gone through, and a guardian had been appointed, what would have happened to the house?" Silence. Not a short silence. Not the silence of someone collecting their thoughts. The silence of someone calculating. "Dad, I'd like you to answer the question," I said. He didn't answer it. He said things around it that it was never about the house, that he and Sabrina had genuine concerns, that I was misinterpreting everything. He said the word family twice more. I said, "I want you to know that the house is in a trust that you have no access to. My accounts have been restructured. My power of attorney is held by my attorney. I had a neuropsychological evaluation in October that documents my full cognitive capacity. I have kept detailed records since last July. Patricia has copies of everything." And when he was quiet, "I'm not telling you this to threaten you," I said. "I'm telling you so that we both understand where things stand. I'd like to have a relationship with my son, but I will not be managed. I will not be maneuvered, and I will not pretend I don't see what I see." He said, "I don't know what to say." "Then maybe don't say anything yet," I said. "Sit with it for a while." I hung up and went back to my soup. Spring came, the way it always does, without asking anyone's permission. The dogwood in the front yard bloomed. I went back to Harold's in December. He'd retired, but his daughter had taken over the lot. Same location, same cash discount on the wreath. Derek and I talk on the phone occasionally. Not as often as before. Not with the same warmth. Not yet. But the calls are honest now, which is something they weren't before. Sabrina does not call me directly anymore. That is also something. Julia came for a long weekend in March. Drove up from Charlottesville with the kids. We made pancakes on Saturday morning, and the 12-year-old beat me at chess, fair and square, and I told her she had her grandmother's patience. She said she didn't know what that meant. I said it meant she was going to do just fine in this world. People sometimes talk about betrayal like it's the end of something. Like when you discover that someone has been measuring the distance between your death and their inheritance. The story is over. You've lost something that can never come back. And maybe that's true. I won't pretend the grief isn't real, or that certain Saturday mornings don't sit differently now, or that there isn't a particular kind of loneliness in knowing what I know about my son. But I'll tell you what else is true. I sleep well. I eat Carol's pot roast when I want to. I have a post office box in the next town, and a good attorney and records that go back 11 months, and a neuropsychological evaluation that says my mind is exactly where it should be. I have a 12-year-old granddaughter who beats me at chess. And the house on Clearwater Drive, the one with the dogwood out front, and the Christmas tree tradition, and 31 years of a good life built inside it. That house is exactly where Carol and I always intended it to. Enter. Some people think money is the prize. I've learned it's not the prize they're really after. What they want is the power that comes with control. The ability to make your decisions for you, to define your limits, to determine when you're finished. That is the thing I would not give them. That is the thing I will never give anyone.